Good morning and welcome to Sydney for the 4th Annual Building Better Cities Summit. This year's summit is titled Housing Australia's Future. Today we'll ask some very important questions about Australia's capacity to house our population in the future. We'll explore the consequences if we do not meet this challenge, and we'll consider some of the policy responses that are required. Access to appropriate and affordable housing is an issue that impacts on every Australian, everyone living in this beautiful country. I would like to welcome especially today our panel of speakers, delegates and invited guests, members of the Housing Industry Association, HIA board members and regional presidents, and representatives of the media. I'd also like to extend a special warm welcome to Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey, who has taken time out of what would be an extremely busy schedule to join us here today. The housing industry is currently building 25,000 homes less than we did a decade ago, and that's 10,000 homes per year less than the recent average. Under current population projections, we need to build 1.3 million homes by 2020 to meet demand. Yet, at the present rate of building, Australia will fall conservatively 150,000 dwellings below that target. And there's not much light at the end of the tunnel. The industry has been constrained by disproportionately high levels of taxation, the burden of red and green tape, and an inflexible industrial relations system. These are just some of the reasons HIA is embarking on our Housing Australia's campaign in this election year. Housing Australians is elevating housing in the national debate and also provides a blueprint of ideas and actions to address some of the problems facing our industry. There are options for future government, and I expect we will see some today. They are much better than the preferable. They are much more preferable than the alternatives. We are joined today by a distinguished list of guest speakers. They have all given up their time to join us, and I offer them all a heartfelt appreciation for being here and sharing their wisdom and insights with us. Likewise, we are very fortunate to have with us today one of the nation's most respectable political journalists, our Master of Ceremonies, Jim Middleton, who will no doubt take us through the summit and keep us all in order. Again, thank you for your attendance at the Housing Industry Association's 2013 Building Better Cities Summit, and look forward to sitting with you today in the audience and sharing today's discussion. Thank you very much.
HIA did invite representatives of both the government and the opposition to attend today's summit. Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey not only accepted the invitation but also offered to speak. Mr Hockey's been the member for North Sydney since 1996. In the Howard government he held a number of portfolios: financial services, small business, human services, and probably most importantly employment and workplace relations towards the end of the period of that government. Since 2009 he has been the Shadow Treasurer. He has walked the Kokoda track with Kevin Rudd, helped save his life when he got into trouble in the waters on the way up. He's also climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and if the coalition does win the election, that will have seemed like a small challenge by comparison with what lies ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Jim. And to you, Ron, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak today. As someone who has been involved with the property industry for all my life, I know how significant confidence is for the market. Obviously, the balance between supply and demand is crucial, and I know there are many influences on supply, such as land release, timely approvals and affordable construction costs, including, as you identify, the impact of tax. I also know that there are many influences on demand, such as affordable and accessible credit, low unemployment and good job security, as well as a reasonable level of immigration. But it is confidence that binds all the fundamentals together, and we'll never have a return of confidence whilst the broken and dysfunctional Labor Party is running the country. Events in Canberra are not the normal, and I do want to begin by touching on these events today because they affect your industry and they affect your business, and they directly affect the confidence of consumers as to whether they can go out and borrow money against their job, against their income, in order to buy housing stock. We could be forgiven for thinking that in 2013 we are back to the future. In 2010 we had one Prime Minister who was elected but discovered months out from the election would be voting for another. And in 2013, only months out from the election, the Prime Minister's been changed again, back to the one we elected in 2007. Who knows who will be Prime Minister if Labor wins again? One thing's for sure, if Kevin Rudd is re-elected in a few weeks' time, he won't be there 3 years. The faceless men will be back. The instability will continue for another 3 years. The dysfunction will continue. And the only way that Labor can be re-elected is on Green preferences, with the support of the Greens, who have been the obvious opponent, the committed enemy of development in Australia. With the return of Kevin Rudd to the Prime Ministership, the Labor Party wants to take it back to the halcyon days of Kevin 07, the election campaign. They hope you'll forget the chaotic days in 2010 before Mr Rudd was brought down by his disloyal deputy. But whether it's 2007 or 2010, they want to take us back to the future. It seems now Australia has two oppositions but no government. The new Prime Minister is promising a fresh start on a whole range of policy areas, conveniently forgetting what's happened over the last 6 years. And the government can't run on its record. They can't run on the record of the old Rudd government because the party, their own party, thought it was such a poor government they knifed the Prime Minister. And they can't run on the record of the Gillard government because their own party acknowledged it was such a failure that they replaced Miss Gillard with Mr Rudd. So I'd say to you, ladies and gentlemen, they can't run on what they've done over the last 6 years because of policy failures. They say it's a sell job failure, but it's a policy failure, and the Australian people know it's policy failure. Whether it's a failure to stop illegal maritime arrivals, cost blowouts from the mining tax, faltering economic growth, continuous budget deficits, ever-rising government debt, decreased competition in banking, and the list goes on. I don't believe the Australian people will fall for the tactic again. The Australian community is desperate for an election. They want to get on with the job. Ms Gillard came to office promising to fix Mr Rudd's problems. She promised to stop the boats, to fix the mining tax, and promised not to introduce a carbon tax. Instead, boat arrivals have increased. Now more than 45,000 people have come on boats at a cost to the budget of over $10 billion. The mining tax has been an abysmal failure. All it's done is hit confidence in the mining industry without raising any revenue, which is the worst possible tax you could have. It sends a message to the world, don't invest here, we've got this new additional tax, and then the tax fails to actually raise any money. But what it does is it has a huge negative impact on investment sentiment, and it complicates the investment equation. And of course, the carbon tax, which a number of you have raised already today, the impact that's had on cost of living but also on construction costs. Now, Mr Rudd says he's going to fix all of that. Well, we've heard that before. It hasn't worked in the past, won't work now. So what's the impact of these political events on the economics that affects your business? Well, the new Rudd government has said it's going to be fiscally responsible. It's going to be responsible with the budget. And I note today, after the new Treasurer, Chris Bowen, had been refusing to back the budget numbers last week, he's now backing the budget numbers and saying that any new expenditure is going to be offset by savings. Well, that's not what his Prime Minister said. And that's added to the confusion about the state of the budget. So yesterday we had a spine stiffener from the Governor of the Reserve Bank. A spine stiffener, and it's rare for the Governor of the Reserve Bank to go out there and say, hang on guys, you've got to remain committed to a surplus. It's rare for him to be so overtly political. But he is concerned, like the rest of the nation is concerned, that Kevin Rudd is going to go on a credit card spending spree in order to try and win the upcoming election. And now, after the event, the new Treasurer has said, yep, I'm getting on that bandwagon, we've got to be fiscally responsible. The challenge is that Mr Rudd has always talked about fiscal responsibility, but he's never actually delivered it. And they know that. Credit card Kevin, we call him. He's fantastic. He's run the biggest deficits in modern Australian history, accumulated the biggest debt in modern Australian history. But challengingly, the net result is that he goes out there and says, I want to be fiscally responsible. I want to have a debate with Tony Abbott on debt and deficit. That's what he says. It's all show. It's all fake Kevin. This is the campaigner that he wants everyone to believe. But when he is actually the Prime Minister, when he actually has to run something, he runs 100 miles away from the rhetoric. And the fact is, it's much harder to be fiscally responsible than it is to actually say it or to promise it. And that's the challenge. Now, when you get into the nuances of what this latest government is suggesting, you start to peel back the truth. Now, Wayne Swan had a rule. It was pretty meaningless because he never kept to it, but he had a rule called a fiscal rule. And he said the government will deliver surpluses on average over the economic cycle. The economic cycle was meant to be 3 to 5 years and it's been pushed out to 10. Now I think it's more a millennium. That is, you know, they'll get there eventually. But he said at least on average we will have surpluses. Because if you are not running surpluses when you have growth at around trend, if you are not running surpluses when you have unemployment with a 5 in front of it, and if you are not running surpluses when you still have amongst the best terms of trade in 100 years, when do you live within your means? And the Australian people know this. The Australian people know this because they themselves are saving, with savings rates at near record highs at the moment. They're not prepared to go out and spend so aggressively because they know they have to live within their means. And they know the government has to live within their means. And that's why if the government is determined to get back to surplus and actually delivers on its words, then it gives confidence to consumers that we can manage that risk of going out and borrowing more money, getting a bit of credit growth into the economy, renovating the home, maybe upgrading the home. It gives them a bit of confidence if they know that there's not going to be another left field tax that hits them tomorrow, or if they know there's not going to be another tax that hits their employer tomorrow, which undermines their job security. It's all swings and roundabouts. That's the bottom line. So Wayne Swan said, don't worry, we'll get back to living within our means on average over the cycle. But in the last few days, the new Treasurer, as Crab walked away, he said, look, we'll get to surplus at some point over the cycle. Not on average, but at some point we'll get there. And Penny Wong, the Finance Minister, who's been around for a while, and it wasn't a slip of the tongue from her. I thought I was giving Chris Bowen the benefit of the doubt as a new Treasurer. He has his training wheels on. I thought I'd give him a chance. Really, he just got it wrong. But then Penny Wong came out and said the same. Penny Wong said, well, maybe we can get there. This is the instability we are living with now. And the instability will not be resolved until there is an election. And the problem for Labor is they can't be stable going forward because they haven't been stable over the past. I just want to remind you, because this is what your clients know. This is what they know. In just 6 years, there have been 6 ministers for small business. 6 ministers in 6 years for small business. In fact, 5 ministers for small business in the last 15 months. There's been 6 ministers for housing in 6 years. 6 ministers for Centrelink and Medicare. 5 assistant treasurers in 6 years. They're the people that are meant to run the tax system, changing the rules. 5 different ministers in 6 years. There's been 4 ministers for immigration, 4 ministers for trade, 4 ministers for sport. But get a load of this. There have been 9 ministers for education in 6 years. 9 ministers for education. There have been 4 ministers for higher education in 4 months. So anyone dealing with government, how do you do it? How do you deal with Canberra? How do you get stability and certainty if the ministry is a revolving door? 70 members of the Parliamentary Labor Party have been on the front bench. There's only 102 of them. 70. How do you feel if you haven't got a Guernsey in the Labor Party front bench? How do you feel? What do you say to your electorate, let alone your wife or your husband? And of course there's been 3 Prime Ministers in 6 years. And for Australia there's been 4 Prime Ministers, including John Howard. 4 Prime Ministers. Even though, of course, one's been recycled. You contrast that with us. We're the stable ones. Normally oppositions are the unstable ones and governments are the stable ones, but it's a complete role reversal. So this is part of the challenge. It's part of the challenge. What does it mean? Well, it means that anyone that makes a promise out of Canberra, you can't rely on it, you can't trust it. That the words are so devalued that they have no meaning. And the impact of that was best summarised by Nouriel Roubini, who released a private report just a few days ago. And he is, Nouriel Roubini is widely regarded as arguably the finest economist in the world, picked the GFC. He said, consumer sentiment has also taken a hit due to the government's big miss on the budget this year, which reversed surprisingly strong confidence in early 2013. This is an observation from afar. And all those promises that they were going to get back to surplus, more than 500 promises from Julia Gillard, from Wayne Swan. Chris Bowen even said the Labor Party had delivered a surplus. And they elevate him to Treasurer, right? And Nouriel Roubini from afar says there is no doubt that the big miss on the budget this year reversed surprisingly strong confidence in early 2013. So what does this mean? Housing construction is one of the sectors that will need to rebound to help to fill the gap left by the ending of the mining investment boom. And notwithstanding the growth of new home sales in May, your organisation is reporting, and I'm concerned about the industry, there is not enough response in the industry and from consumers to make up the slack in the fall on the mining boom. The Reserve Bank cash rate has been reduced 7 times since October 2011, from a peak of 4.75% to 2.75% on the 8th of May. And I know the Governor of the Reserve Bank suggested they were thinking carefully about going further. There is no doubt in my mind that the cuts are having less impact on consumer confidence than they did at higher levels. The cash rate is actually now lower than any time during the global financial crisis, and is probably at the lowest level for half a century. And these reductions have been largely passed on to housing and business lending rates. However, the housing industry seems to be responding more sluggishly than normal to the lower rates. New dwelling construction approvals rose steadily through 2012 but that improvement has slowed this year. You can almost map it identically to what Nouriel Roubini was saying, that it fell off a cliff in 2013 when the government was obviously failing to live within its means, which completely spooked consumers. And even though house prices are now moving up, that doesn't do anything at the moment for the supply of new housing. And the malaise in the construction sector has been confirmed by a national survey of building and construction. The June quarter survey shows that business conditions remain below the break-even 50 mark and are lower than recorded during the global financial crisis. Confidence also remains below the 50 mark, indicating that builders see no improvement on the horizon. Our chief economist from another building organisation observes that the missing ingredient is business and investor confidence. And one of these things, one of the underbuilding, is that Australian housing remains very expensive, and it's very expensive to build. The Economist magazine shows that Australia has some of the most expensive housing in the world. It shows the housing market remains severely overvalued against both household income and rents. Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey for 2013, which I've quoted on numerous occasions, confirms we have one of the world's most expensive housing markets, and it uses house prices divided by gross annual median household income. And it shows it's not just confined to the major cities, but also regional cities and towns. Of the 337 housing markets surveyed, Australia had 8 of the 20 most unaffordable locations, including Sydney and Melbourne, no surprises, but Port Macquarie, Coffs Harbour and Wollongong, Sunshine Coast and Mandurah in Western Australia. More telling, Australia currently has no housing markets ranked as affordable or moderately unaffordable by Demographia. So why are we so high? Why are our costs so high? Well, Demographia suggests that higher land prices are a major factor, and that a key reason for expensive land is inadequate release of new land for development. Now, I know here in New South Wales the government is moving in the right direction in relation to this, but it remains a critical issue around the country. It also notes that affordable housing is a critical component of economic sustainability. So Australia does not so much have a problem with excess demand for housing, it has a problem with inadequate supply, arguably. Put simply, inadequate supply of land leads to inadequate supply of new housing. Other commentators note that inadequate housing construction is linked to costly development fees that disproportionately charge the cost of necessary infrastructure on new house buyers. And land release policies and development fees are issues for state governments, but it's because state governments have been running out of money that they haven't been able to they have had to look at other sources of income, land and land costs, costs of recovery of infrastructure, gambling, increased fees and charges. The state's clamoring around for new sources of income when they run out of money and when they're badly managed. And it flows through to the broader economy. And that's one of the reasons why Tony and Abbott and I have pledged to have a full review of the tax system with a tax agenda for the following election, and not dissimilar to our introduction of the new tax system back in 2000. I am also already on the record as advocating incentive payments to the states from the Commonwealth, underpinned by state performance targets to accelerate the release of land and lower the cost of new construction. And my view is, similar to national competition policy, that if you can identify the regulation you are going to remove, the costs that you are going to take out of the economy, it will provide a net financial benefit to the Commonwealth Government. And the Commonwealth Government should provide those monies as an incentive to the states to get rid of the regulation that in turn stimulates the growth. So we are basically looking at ways to try and provide the states with financial incentives to get rid of red tape and green tape. And I think that'll make a huge difference. Now, some of the states are now rejigging their assistance packages for housing to make them more effective in boosting the supply of new stock. And New South Wales and Queensland are doing a great job there. but more needs to be done. And of course, one of those areas is getting rid of red tape and green tape. And the Victorian government in particular has done a good job in getting rid of red tape. We will, as a coalition, restore confidence. We have provided over 4 million households with a copy of our plan that outlines the agenda that Tony Abbott and the coalition team have for this economy. Number one, we will live within our means. We cannot afford to keep rolling out government spending based on borrowed money. It is unacceptable. And as hard as it is to keep saying it, it is the truth. The public service in Canberra is now 20,000 larger than what it was in the last year of the coalition government. And we've said over the first 2 years 12,000 will go through natural attrition. We have to reduce the size of government to increase the size of the private sector. So number one, live within your means. Number two, get rid of the taxes. We are going to get rid of the carbon tax. We're not going to rebadge it. We're not going to say it's going to floating. We are getting rid of the carbon tax because it is a cost on manufacturing. There is no doubt about it. It is a cost to business in Australia that other jurisdictions do not have. And the carbon tax is going to go up front, and the mining tax is going to go. You do not speed up the field of runners by slowing down your fastest runner, putting a ball and chain around their leg. The mining tax has been a disaster from go to woe. It was Kevin Rudd's invention, and he now is going to try and increase it apparently or change it. This uncertainty has been killing mining confidence, and we are going to get rid of the mining tax. So number one, live within your means. Number two, get rid of the taxes. Number three, productivity growth. Tony Abbott and I have a 6-point plan on productivity, and one of those points is about getting rid of red tape and green tape. We are going to have a one-stop shop for environmental approvals between the Commonwealth and the state, so that business do not have to go through an environmental approval process at a state level and then environmental approval process at the federal level when it's the same damn environment. It's the same environment, but it has two approval processes. It's ridiculous. And we're going to cut $1 billion of red tape from everything from financial advisory services, which are now absolutely smothered in red tape, right through to a whole lot of the red tape you guys have to go through in development approvals and so on. We need to streamline processes and make it a faster and simpler process. And when it comes to industrial relations, we are bringing back the Australian Building and Construction Commission with all of its powers and resources. And we're going to give it the power to stand up to the thuggery of the CFMEU and in the ETU and a number of these unions who have basically engaged in militant behaviour to try and drag construction industry in Australia back to Neanderthal times. We will bring them back. We've promised to bring them back in one of our detailed policies, which is our workplace relations policy. And the fourth key component of our economic plan is proper engagement with our region. I see Kevin Rudd's flying off to Indonesia today. Didn't take him long. Very keen to get on a plane. Used to be Kevin 747, now he's Kevin A380. It's the only thing that's changed. And the fact of the matter is, he did more damage to our relations in Asia than any Prime Minister in recent times. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? But he did. Some people have short memories for what he did in the relationship with Indonesia. Megaphone diplomacy, they used to call it, yeah. And the relationship with Japan and the relationship with China, using colourful words about the Chinese at Copenhagen that I should not repeat on family TV. The only way you are going to rebuild relationships with the region is if there is mutual respect and trust. And you don't have mutual respect and trust if you have a revolving door of prime ministers, a revolving door of foreign ministers. Relationships in the region are based on long-lasting friendships. To look someone in the eye and say, let's do a deal. That's how you rebuild relationships in the region. That's what the Coalition's done before and will do again. So number one, live within your means. Number two, get rid of the taxes. Number three, grow the economy. The 6-point plan on productivity. And number four, real engagement with the region. Ladies and gentlemen, the housing industry is a key part of the Australian economy. I know that as the son of a real estate agent. I know that as someone that has been involved in property all my life. If the housing industry isn't working at its best, the Australian economy is not working at its best. It's as simple as that. Whether it be the major developers or be it the credit providers that are associated with it, or the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who indirectly and directly deal with the housing industry and the supply of goods, or subcontractors that are engaged as family businesses on a day-to-day basis with the housing industry, you drive our economy in so many ways. The glue that holds it all together is confidence about the future. Confidence is what gives people an incentive to take a risk, believing that they can share in the benefits of that risk-taking. And Australians will not take smart, calculated business risks if there is this wild card in Canberra that just will not go away. So I say to you, the only people that can deliver confidence, the only people that can deliver stability, the only people that can deliver predictability are the Coalition. And that's why we need an election. We're not going to get stability, we're not going to get predictability, we're not going to get trust back until we have an election and a change of government. Thank you very much.
Joe Hockey, thank you very much.